Hey everyone, welcome to another AI conversation. And today I'm happy to be joined by a startup I've been interacting with via IBPAP, Stephen Hsu, who's the chief scientist at Superfocus, and Eric Manalac, who's actually based in Manila, but he's representing Superfocus here. Welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be on.
Yeah. Anyway, so we were talking offline about, BPOs and AI. So maybe let's dial it back and, share with our viewers, what do you guys do? What's the core offering, the technology, and then let's talk about how it's potentially going to affect the BPO sector.
So we're a venture-backed tech startup in the United States, and our main goal from the beginning has been to produce reliable AIs that do not hallucinate. So having tracked the evolution of GPT for many years now, we were aware that the way these models are created, they're basically trained to produce plausible text in response to a query, but they don't really try to get the facts right. So if they've seen a lot of information in their training on internet text, they may just regurgitate some of that information, even if it's not actually the right information relevant to the query at hand. And also, the models are smart enough that they just know what sounds good. So if they know, if you're asking it to help you debug some problem on your operating system, it can just say like, oh yeah, there's a drop-down menu, and you just click the third button and it'll shut off that feature if you don't like it. But that could be completely false. It could just be a made-up thing, but it knows that it has seen responses like that or conversations with that kind of content in its training data, so it can just regurgitate it. And we understood this was going to be a barrier to adoption or applications of AI in the enterprise. And so our company has built a very complex software architecture that uses LLMs as key components, but suppresses the hallucinations. The simplest way I would say it for someone who's in the BPO industry is that if you have training materials that you use to bring a human from, okay, this person is off the street, they have good English skills, but they don't really know anything about the product. They don't know how to support a Sony camcorder or whatever the product is, Sony TV. The way we bridge that gap is we give them training manuals so they understand how the TV works, how to troubleshoot it, et cetera, et cetera. Those exact same training manuals can be embedded by Superfocus as a kind of attached memory for the LLM. And once it's attached, the LLM will basically behave like a human that understands English perfectly, or any other language like Japanese or Chinese or whatever, French, Spanish. But it will act like a human that has read and completely comprehended and completely memorized all the information in the training manuals. So unlike that long learning curve that humans have to go through, almost instantaneously, once we inject that memory into the LLM, it will behave just like a human, and it can answer all the questions that you need to answer based on the training materials.
Yeah, that's actually a very, intuitively it makes sense once you learn about it. But speaking from experience, the first time large language models came out, we kind of all assumed they know everything, right? And then this whole thing about hallucinations came up and scared a lot of people with it. And that has a bigger impact when we're talking about enterprise adoption of these models. So can you talk about the journey that led to this from your perspective? What was the inspiration? And I remember in a conversation you mentioned you don't actually just use one model. You could potentially have several models talking together and validating each other. So just explain maybe at a high level how that all works.
Yeah, so my background, I'm actually a professor at Michigan State University. And so I've been following the development of deep learning, neural nets, generalized transformers. Those are the things that are used to build language models for some time. But I knew that the actual technique used to train the models on, say 1 trillion words of text, right? That's how it got its amazing emergent language ability. That didn't exist, on the planet a few years ago, and now it exists, right? the way that was accomplished was at the cost of the models only being trained to generate plausible text. So I just knew that was going to be an issue. And so with my co-founder, Tushar Sheth, we decided this is a very important research problem to solve. Once it's been solved, then it leads to a much, much broader set of applications for large language models. People who have played, almost everybody now has played with ChatGPT, so they know how amazing it is. It seems to know about everything, but maybe 10, 15% of the time, it says something that's not quite right, if you look really carefully. Our models are kind of the opposite. Although they are really good at language, just like ChatGPT, they only know about one narrow but deep subject, but they're perfectly reliable on that subject. And so it's a narrow kind of focused model as opposed to this kind of general wise guy ChatGPT kind of model. And you mentioned the fact that we actually use multiple models in our software architecture. That's because there are different tasks that are performed by our software. When a query comes in, we might use a particular model, which isn't GPT-4, to break up the query into logical subcomponents, to search the corpus of information for the most relevant information in the attached memory, relevant to the query, then to, in an automated way, build a prompt, which is then sent to the big model. The big model responds to the prompt, but before that content is written out to the human user, that content could be examined by some other models, which are checking it very carefully, fact checking it basically, or error checking it to make sure that there's no hallucination. So there's this kind of multi-step process, and I'm sorry to go into such detail because for non-technical listeners, I'm sure what I just said is just gobbledygook. But for the people who are engineers listening to your podcast, they can probably have a sense now of what we're doing and why it's a somewhat complicated software architecture. At the end of the day, none of that matters to the business user or even to the engineers at the companies that we partner with, because the steps are very simple. You give us the training materials that you use to make a person off the street into a good agent. We take those materials and then plug them in to this complicated software architecture I just described. With a turnaround time, which could be as little as a day, we return to you an AI that will just answer questions perfectly, even complex support tasks, procedural tasks. It will do all of that based on the information that we've been supplied from the BPO. So all of this is under the hood. You know, nobody really knows how their microwave oven works, or nobody really knows how their 3-nanometer chips in their phone works. Nobody really understands that. What they realize is that the functional properties of this thing. I turn over the manuals that we originally used to train humans. Wow, these guys have figured out a way to take those manuals and create an AI which behaves like a superhuman. Because if there are thousands of pages or even tens of thousands of pages in the training manual, it's very tough for an individual human to master all of that knowledge, to support hundreds of models of TV, or to support lots of different possible insurance contracts that, you know, a particular bank, a particular financial entity issues. Tough for humans to get to that level, but the AI gets to that level more or less instantaneously using our technology. And so this is really, I would actually say it's a kind of sea change, because everyone can imagine what I'm saying now because they played with ChatGPT, but very few people have seen an AI that is so reliable and has such depth of understanding that it could be used actually, honestly, in place of a human, could be assisting a human, or could be used in place of a human in a CX or BPO setting. And we're the first company to produce such AIs. And the reason I'm in the Philippines today is actually to just socialize the concept, just to show people in all the BPO companies that are in your trade association, IBPAP, what is coming, what is the future that's coming. And the way I've been explaining it to them is, we had an earthquake in San Francisco. Earthquakes cause tsunamis, waves of water to cross the Pacific. There is a tsunami headed toward the Philippines. So 8% of the Philippine GDP, almost $40 billion, is BPO work. AI is going to change that forever. So there's a tsunami that's headed toward the Philippines. People here are not, they're aware of it a little bit, thanks to people like you, but they don't have that sort of visceral feeling of asking questions of this AI, and the AI is answering perfectly all of the questions that it asks, which are very detailed. You could ask, is that tsunami a kind of mild, friendly 6-foot wave? It's going to just wash ashore in Manila Bay, and you can take a little bath in it. You can float in it. It's not going to hurt you. Or is it a 600-foot wave that's going to irrevocably alter the BPO industry in the Philippines? As a technologist and as a researcher, university researcher who works directly with this technology and also has now shipped some products for actual global brands that are using this kind of stuff to support customers around the world, I think it's closer to the 600-foot wave than to the 6-foot wave. And we can obviously get into the economics and other aspects of this further, but that's sort of where we're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first started talking publicly about ChatGPT and generative AI earlier this year, just around March. There was a very weird doom and gloom sense. Uh but more of the Hollywood type of doom and gloom, Terminator, bots going out of control. And then towards June, that kind of subsided a bit. People started getting their chill back. And then now what I'm sensing is it's not quite doom and gloom, but there's this sense of trepidation that yeah, it's not gonna shoot us down like Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminators, but jobs obviously are gonna get impacted, good or bad. Um, so I wanna pursue two threads before we get to the jobs bit because I'm sure everyone wants to hear about that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that training process? So obviously it largely depends on how good and how extensive the training manuals are, for example. So have you started to see like early trends, like what would make an ideal like document or set of documents to train your AI with that can be
Yeah.
very effective, becoming
Yeah,
assistants for call
that's a great
centers?
question.
Yeah.
Let me just first differentiate between the concept of training a model and the concept of attaching additional memory to the model. Okay, those are two different things. We are mainly doing the latter. When you have a model that's used, potentially 100 million, few $100 million of compute, and the training sample of text that's been used to create the model is of order 1 trillion words. If you then come along with your measly 30,000, suppose you have 30,000 pages of technical documents to support a few hundred models of TV, flat screen TVs. Okay, so you have the product manual, you have the troubleshooting guides that your agents use to diagnose problems with the TVs. All of that together maybe is 30,000 pages. We actually know this from our real world experience. So that 30,000 pages might be the knowledge base for the human agents. Sounds like a lot from the perspective of someone comes in off the street in Manila. They have great English skills, but they don't know anything about, troubleshooting TVs. And you try to train them up so they have at least some mastery. They certainly can't remember everything in those 30,000 documents, but at least they can kind of navigate around the documents and find the information they need to support the user, right? It's a challenging task for a human to climb that learning curve. However, relative to 1 trillion tokens of training data, that 30,000 is nothing. So if I do some further training of an LLM using those 30,000 pages of documents, the delta, the amount of change in the weights of the LLM is negligible. So a lot of people early on, if you go a year back, people were saying, oh, there's a process called fine tuning. Again, I'm getting into some technical details, sorry, but people thought, oh, fine tuning is going to answer the problem. We're going to fine tune a model that really understands exactly how televisions work and how to talk about troubleshooting a television. But what they discovered is that what seems like a lot of information about the television is negligible compared to the original training corpus for the model, and it doesn't really make a huge order 100% kind of difference. Instead, if you plug that 30,000 documents in as a memory, and you force the model to consult its own memory before giving any answer. That's effectively what we're doing. Our software architecture forces the model to check its own memory, to search through its own memory for the most relevant information, think about it a little bit, and then give the response. That can cause an order 100% change in the behavior of the model. And it's inherent in the architecture and the design. We're not trying to do more training with a little bit more data. We are doing something completely different of forcing the model to consult its own attached memory before answering the question. And that then produces a thing which in our own testing has something like 99.5% accuracy. Like given 1,000 queries, it might only make a mistake on a handful of queries out of 1,000. And that's actually far beyond what typical humans can do in that setting. So the AI is superhuman on a narrow task, but it's exactly the narrow task that a typical BPO has people doing. I hope I answered that. I hope I gave some insight into the difference between training and attaching a memory. And then let me just talk about what is the ideal kind of memory to attach to this thing. Typically, we find if a company is good at training its own people, so they have a systematic way of just could be PowerPoints, could be PDFs, could be any format. If they have a systematic set of documents that they show their workers to bring them up to speed, and which the workers can consult, like if it's a very complicated process, like, oh my gosh, this guy's a diamond platinum member and is requesting a reimbursement of a business class fare. But, we treat these diamond people very carefully. Here are the procedures for how to deal with this lady's request, right? That very complicated process information, as long as it's written clearly enough for a human to understand it, our AI will understand it. So it can read, just like it can read a Wikipedia page and it can summarize it for you. It can look carefully at that process and say, okay, if this person is diamond member, you got to go into this subsystem to make the change. But then we don't charge them. And also they get priority on the seat assignment, whatever the steps are, right? Our AI will perfectly understand that is what it's supposed to do. And for example, if it's providing agent assist, it can instantaneously just put on the screen, these are the steps you should follow. And the agent, the human agent that it's assisting, doesn't have to think. She can just go, okay, I trust the AI. I can just maintain my, pleasant conversation with this irate lady who's a diamond platinum member who wants to do something, make her change in her reservation. I can be very intuitive and emotive with this customer, but I just trust what the AI put on the screen and I don't need to think any more about it. I just execute the steps. So that kind of use case where I'm doing agent assist and the AI is basically taking over the mental work of what that agent in the past would have had to really understand, okay, exactly what are you supposed to do with these diamond platinum members? How is it different from just a gold member on Delta Airlines? Instead of having to understand all that, they can just type the question into the screen and they get an assist, and then they don't have to strain themselves to try to resolve the issue. They just follow what the AI says.
So have you had early experiences on kind of the ideal use cases for this? Obviously, call centers tend to cluster around a few use cases like support, for example. Does it also work for outbound kind of work, like maybe collections or sales, or any thoughts on that? I mean, and what kind of, again, I keep thinking, now that you mentioned you're attaching memory, a lot depends on how that document is kind of crafted and built. So does it work best with kind of scenarios like, okay, you give questions and answers in that document and then that's put in the memory of the chatbots? Anyway, just thinking out loud, what would be the kind of the ideal scenario when call centers try getting set up?
So, we started out as a company basically hey, we have this technological idea for how to solve this problem. We tested it. We built all kinds of first demonstration models and things like this. But then we got into pilots with real world companies to see like exactly how they needed the AI to behave. And the kinds of pilots that we've done have been things like, supporting a consumer electronics product, which is pretty complicated. Supporting a telco, like mobile data and voice text provider, with people having typically problems with their account, or they want to add minutes, or they want to leave the service or transfer them, something like that. Some travel applications, helping a travel agent, some issues with legal contracts and insurance contracts. So across a fairly broad problem set, we've built AIs that work very well, are really superhuman, but in a narrow way. Things we haven't done yet, but which we hope to do, are things which involve maybe a little more autonomy for the AI to make transactions, so that maybe the AI makes a decision about like whether someone gets a refund, or whether you send them a new shipping label so they can return the item to the e-commerce vendor. There's some additional logic built into the AI, which we're pretty confident we can implement, but we have not yet done any real world cases like that. For outbound things like collections or sales, obviously it really depends on the use case. Some use cases are so simple, like you're just calling someone to say like, hey, you owe us money. And if you don't pay this amount by the end of the month, you're going to owe us this amount plus 10%, right? That is so simple. I don't know that a human agent needs help to do that. Human agents can probably do that more or less perfectly. But I will tell you that it is very easy for me to make the AI call somebody and say, hey, you owe money. And I can use, Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice. Well, maybe he'll sue us, but I can use like, a very authoritative, mean voice, or a very nice lady's voice. I mean, there's so many things we can do where if all you're doing is alerting somebody that you owe money and you better pay it by this date or you owe more, the AI can do that so much more efficiently than a human. I mean, I can automate that so that the thing makes like ginormous number of calls per day, many, many more than a human could hope to make. And furthermore, if the person being called by the collections agency has questions like, wait, I thought I sent a payment on June 4th. Didn't you see that? And then the thing can easily pull the records and look at it. And then because it's an LLM, it can look at it and he can say like, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, looking at your records, we never received a payment on June 4th. So if that's a very kind of small, narrow set of tasks that, surely the problem is not that the human agent is challenged by it, but nevertheless, so it's not the issue, but nevertheless, the AI can do it perfectly as well and at much higher volume and scale. And we can customize things, like we can make the voice threatening, we can make the voice friendly, we can do whatever you want. So all these things are in our future. And the use case I just described to you, we never worked on it because it's so obviously easy for us to do that. We pursued more challenging things. But interestingly, in my conversations in Manila, I realized, wait, a lot of companies are doing stuff like that. They're doing collections, or maybe they're selling a product. Like they're calling people saying like, hey, would you like to buy this kind of insurance, or would you like to buy, anything? Well, the main issue is like maybe for sales, people don't want to talk to an AI. So maybe there's that challenge to get over. But in terms of the AI calling someone saying, hey, Mrs. Smith, I noticed you sent an inquiry in for XYZ. I'm here to offer you an XYZ at a discount. And I can answer any questions you have about this XYZ. The AI can do all those things perfectly now. It wasn't a use case, again, that we had thought much about until I came here and started talking to BPO companies and realized a lot of their volume is actually work like that. But the answer is kind of boring. The answer is like, yes, if you wanted us to do it with an AI, we could do that perfectly with an AI.
So let's zoom out a bit and think about what you mentioned earlier about, is it a 6-foot wave or a 600-foot wave? I mean, obviously people's opinions will vary on this, but based on what you're seeing, what is the likely path? Do you see a few BPOs trying to be a first mover here? Like there was that story, I think earlier this year, about an Indian call center that eliminated 90% of their staff, and and all their numbers are up, profit is up, customer satisfaction is up. So contrary to a lot of expectations. But that's obviously not a very pleasant scenario for from a job standpoint. So from your standpoint, how do you see this playing out,
Yeah. So
in
let
the
me give
near
you,
term?
let me just start first with the just purely analytical kind of scientific analysis, which is that even if you start employing the AIs in the most modest way, so they're just doing agent assist, there have already been academic studies of agent assist, and typically the efficiency gain could easily be like 20%. So in other words, the human with the agent assist is able to resolve 20% more issues per day and with equivalent or higher customer satisfaction. Not surprising, because basically the AI is just kind of telling the human what to do. Human doesn't have to stress out. The human agent can be very friendly on the phone, and it can just get through everything faster. 20%, is that a big deal for you guys? If just that simplest application gets rolled out industry wide and you need 20% fewer people, is that a big deal? I guarantee you the owners of the company will be perfectly happy with that, because their profit margins are going to go up. They're not going to have to pay that 20% efficiency gain in order to get the technology. They may only have to pay 5% efficiency gain to get the technology, and then their profits went up by 15%, right? So the cost of the technology is way below the cost savings that they're going to get from it. So that's just like baseline. So is that I don't know how big a tsunami at 20% effect on overall human employment levels is. It seems like a big effect. I could go much further. So some of the companies that we've built things, these AIs for in the States, like global consumer electronics brand, their goal is to make the AI the layer one contact. So when people come in and they're having trouble with their TV, they're going to first meet the AI, and only if the AI can't resolve their issue is it going to escalate to a human. And most of the time, it's going to be able to resolve the issue. So that could be not a 20% effect on employment in that category of BPO. It could be like a 70% effect on employment, right? So they only need to reserve a small sub team for the escalated cases, and then most of it's just being handled by the bot, by the AI. So these are things which are, I think, going to change the industry radically. I think if you're a Philippine BPO company and you're trying to get a client, so suppose you have a potential customer, you send your sales team to Los Angeles to try to sign this client. Number one, that client is talking to pure tech companies like us. Pure tech companies like us are talking to that same client saying, oh, you're a cell phone service provider. Why don't you just let our bot be the first line of support? You don't need humans. You just need a smaller team of humans. The BPO people may never know about that other conversation. They may go to Los Angeles and have the meeting, and they show them the standard thing. They show them their beautiful call center in the Philippines with little bunk beds where agents can take naps between shifts or whatever, ping pong tables. They don't realize that the guy they're talking to on the other end has been talking for weeks with a technology company that's going to say, like, well, we'll just roll this out in the cloud, and your customer is using their mobile phone. They can just use their mobile phone to talk to our AI if they ever have an issue, right? And for some reason, maybe the BPO here doesn't get the business, and they won't understand why. Like, why didn't I get the business? Well, if their sales guy follows up with that cell phone, that mobile data provider, 6 months later, they'll realize, wait, these guys went like totally AI. That's why we didn't get the business, right? So I think companies here need to understand what they're competing against. So as you said earlier, you said, well, at first people were like, wow, ChatGPT, it's the end of the world. These machines are going to replace all of us. It's like the Terminator, right? But that's like kind of science fiction-y stuff. It may happen 10 years from now or something, or 20 years from now, but not immediately. So people this is the hype curve. So immediately there's some huge amount of hype, then things calm down. But when things calm down, in the background, there are technologists like us who are just slowly building, or maybe not that slowly, but building the technology in the background to make the original hyped breakthrough of ChatGPT into a viable, reliable enterprise product. And so we've now reached that point. So I think that, that is the evolution of the understanding. And I think when we've demoed in the many meetings that we've had while I've been in Manila, where we demoed shown them what our AI can do, generally people are surprised. They're not aware that something like that exists in the world. So it's a new revelation for them to see it and be shocked at how it can do like a step-by-step troubleshooting. How do I get Netflix on my TV? What's wrong? Is it the app that hasn't been installed right? Do I have some permissions wrong? It'll just patiently navigate through all these steps with the user, holding the user's hand. They were just shocked that an AI would do that.
So Dominic, maybe also to contextualize, right, we're both Filipinos, this is our home, and as you both know, that 8% figure of how much BPOs and call centers account for the Philippine GDP is probably an undercount, because it doesn't count all of the businesses like commercial real estate, furniture, which supplies the desks, the computers for the BPOs, etc., which all depend on this working out. But the point I would like to bring, in two of the articles he released before, one on Scale AI and one on Presto Automation, those cover the types of AIs which make, claims about how much is automated, whereas in reality, there's a poor Filipino in Davao or Cebu who's actually handling the orders. But I remember the first time I came over to the US to see Superfocus's pilot for insurance, and was automatically able to answer very complex questions on policy premiums areas. And I was able to see it across their telco pilots, across their consumer electronics pilots. And kind of the light bulb which went off in my head was, as much as especially IBPAP would like to think that we can kind of infinitely retrain our people to just keep abreast of the AI wave, so that no matter how high the tsunami is, there are basically surfboards retraining, so people can always accommodate. It just seems very difficult for me to think that, right, with AIs which have superhuman performance right now, that those will get dumber over the future, or that kind of your marginal Filipino or Indian or Vietnamese person, especially things like our underperformance at PISA or the BPO hiring problems, will be able to outpace that. So it's a very, very troubling quandary.
Yeah, and I think honestly, no human can compete with, let's suppose the ask of the human is, you know what? Brand X has been producing TVs for 30 years. And we're still supporting all of them. And so, wow, there are 30,000 documents related to supporting. And it could be some really old model that was sold in 2015 or 2005. And someone's still calling in, like, my plasma screen thing is flickering. What am I supposed to do? No human can master that entire corpus. If they work in that call center for 10 years supporting TVs, they're not going to have like full instantaneous recall of that 30 page, what's in those 30,000 pages. But the AI does. The AI will immediately recognize, like, okay, this is model XYZ. This is what's said on the page in the support troubleshooting guide on what to do with flickering of the plasma screen, blah, blah, blah. And it immediately, and because it's an LLM, it can talk to the human in a human-like way and say, okay, I understand your screen is flickering. It's an old plasma screen. That's what that tends to happen. This is a way you can do, this is a check you can do now to see whether there's a degradation in your screen, or does it have to do with your power source? All those things are complicated. It's too much to ask even a super capable Filipino BPO person with years of experience to be able to instantaneously shift into, oh, model XYZ. Wow, I haven't seen a query on that in 5 years, but okay, I'll help you right now. The human's going to have to like open the guide, search around on their computer, try to find the part of the guide that talks about flickering of the screen, read it. Meanwhile, there's some angry guy in Pittsburgh, like, what the hell, man? I pay good money for this TV. It's only 10 years old, and the AI doesn't have any of that problem. It doesn't feel emotional about what the human is saying. It instantaneously recalls. It can just flash on the screen for the customer, like, well, these are the guidelines for what to do with the plasma screen that's flickering. It's an unfair competition. It's just like, asking a human to run a race against a car or a motorcycle. It's an unfair competition now. And the scary part is that it is a cognitive competition. It's not a physical competition, right? I can't drill like an electric drill. And I also can't think like a superpowered LLM in a attached memory software architecture.
Also, maybe Dom, you can kind of lend your thoughts as to whether you agree with this or not. But one of the things that we've observed in talking with quite a few of these call centers is that even if, right, this tsunami is a 600-foot wave, there does seem to be a consensus amongst the call centers that there are going to be some call centers and BPOs which survive. But from the conversations we have had, this AI wave seems to be going hand in hand with this mega consolidation, wherein it might be the case that a few call centers, especially those which obsessively invest in AI for CX, are kind of the ones left standing, because the labor arbitrage equation, which is allowed for all of the BPO, all of the 8%, all of the 1.4 million jobs, is kind of flipped now, because now you have the cost of, right, a person versus just the cost of compute and algorithms which are trained like the memory module. So I guess maybe a second more urgent clarion call would be for the small and mid-sized BPOs who maybe might not have the ability to match the R&D capabilities of the big boys who have like hundreds of thousands of FTEs, but they're still in that same competition. And our belief is that kind of, unless they're able to compete on the same playing field, there are really no underdog advantages to being behind on AI.
Yeah, one of the conversations we had just yesterday with a very big BPO, global BPO, 500,000 employees across multiple countries, 500 million to $1 billion a year in earnings, public company, I think on NASDAQ. That company has the resources to buy technology like ours, implement it at scale across all their subcategories, so that when they're trying to sell the business and they're competing against a smaller BPO here, they can say, well, we've already implemented this huge AI platform and we'll run your thing, you know, using that AI platform. Very tough for a small company to match that. Furthermore, when you get to a sufficient level of scale, the really big companies can do things like actually do original research in trying to improve the models, improving the LLMs, maybe do some additional compute to generate LLMs that are qualitatively a little better for certain types of tasks. There's all kinds of things that are out of reach for smaller companies to compete in. But I would guess in the future, the largest CX, BPO type companies that are global will have dedicated AI labs, because they are in a good position. They get tons of interaction data where the AI that they've deployed is interacting with people, and they get to store that data, and then they can use that data to further improve. And that data could even be valuable to companies like Google and OpenAI, Microsoft, because it's a very unique set of situations where a million times a day, some human is interacting with an AI. We're capturing that interaction perfectly. We can use that as training data to build the next generation of AIs. So there's a cycle that's just, you're going to see it just accelerate, where I think the smaller BPOs are really going to struggle to keep up with, you know, the biggest ones for this reason.
Yeah, so, well, just like that, the hour is almost up and we barely scratched the surface. So I wonder if we can, as we wrap up, talk about kind of the worst case scenario and kind of the likely scenario. Because obviously you've been spending a few days here, Stephen. You've seen the lay of the land. My impression is people aren't worried at all. And that's whether they understand the technology or not. It's a completely separate issue.
Yeah, people are pretty relaxed. Of course, it is the Christmas season here, so
Yeah. And these things tend to happen very quickly. If I remember once upon a time, the adoption of the internet, for example. And I also remember, although I was still in university, the switch from pagers to mobile phones. You remember that? Everyone
yep.
had a pager, and then suddenly no one had a pager anymore. that was kind of a mini call center moment because you had call centers running those paging companies, um, and then suddenly they got displaced. But there was another industry that adopted them. So can we talk about that? Like, okay, what is a sure, what is a good indicator to kind of know that, okay, looks like the waves are now starting to recede, and you can barely see the wave, the big one coming in the horizon. You don't know how big it really is until it's finally at you. So
Right.
can you paint a picture for that?
Yeah, I think, let's suppose you're the owner of a BPO here in the Philippines, and you're not one of the biggest ones, but you've got a healthy business, doing well for your employees and your family, et cetera. And you're scanning the horizon, and the equivalent of the water receding because the big wave is sucking it out, and now the big wave is going to come and hit you. Well, one signal of that kind would be some tech entrepreneurs from America start appearing in Manila and showing you demos of things like, wait, how did it do that? I didn't know it could do that. That's pretty amazing. Um, and these tech entrepreneurs like us are mainly here to understand, we're here to understand the BPO industry. We didn't set out to do BPO. We set out to build an AI that doesn't hallucinate and is reliable. It turns out BPO is a good industry for that technology. So now we're here trying to learn about the BPO industry. People you could think of that as like an early signal. Another early signal is if you're finally attuned to the CX industry and you notice some big companies like Samsung or some global brand switching over more and more of its support to AI, you realize like every time that happens, that's some business that is no longer coming to Manila, right? So if you start to see that, and you start to see like, well, wait, I'm actually getting good support, on my Samsung phone through an AI. Actually, the place that's furthest along on this is in China. A lot of the Chinese phone brands have their own large language models, and they're starting to ship them with the phone operating system. So I think you have to, obviously, the more technologically sophisticated you are, the better you are attuned to what is happening. But I would just say, like, every organization here should say, like, you know what, senior execs, let's have a team. Let's have a team that's spending at least part-time monitoring what is the progress of AI. Oh, maybe IBPAP should have a team like that. Like, oh, you're the guy, Dom. Monitoring, like, okay, what's the most amazing deployment case at scale that we're aware of now? Like best in class, who's done it first? Did Comcast TV do it first, or did Apple do it first, or American Express? Who did it first? What does it look like? Can we do a case study? Will they like show it to us? Could we send a team or at least do a Zoom meeting with them and try to get a sense of how well it's working, how many people it services, how many jobs it took away from people? I think every company here that wants to survive the pager to mobile phone transition needs to actually be scanning the horizon. They need to allocate a little bit of their resources to scanning that horizon to see what is actually happening.
All right. And I think there's no better place to end it but here, but we're certainly going to do another episode. I want to thank Steven and Eric for sharing us a glimpse of what's probably going to happen in the next few months, certainly within the next year. Yeah, and it's really interesting times to be living when, new technologies get adopted. I mean, we had mobile phones before, we had the internet before. Heck, this might even be as close as probably the printing press once upon a time, and the church wanted to burn those books. And now, we're getting a lot of mixed reactions with AI. A few people want to jump into it. Most people would rather wait for the wave to arrive. But again, as with any real tsunami, when you finally see how big it is, it's probably too late. You're gonna get hit,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, Dom, I want to thank you for being so helpful to us during our visit here. We learned a lot from you about where exactly BPO is right now, AI in BPO, and the time we've spent with companies here on this trip has been invaluable. So we have a much more mature understanding of this industry, where our technology might be applied than we did before we came to Manila.
Yeah, maybe just one last thing, Dom. One image by which we can end this podcast. Give me 1 minute. I can share a screen, right?
Yeah, go for it. Let's leave them something to think about.
This is a good image. It conveys.
I love this. You should turn this into a logo.
Yeah, the little guy on the right is the friendly tsunami that's not going to hurt you.
The gentle wave,
Yeah, the other one might hurt you.
possibly. And the punchline is at the horizon, they both look identical.
Yes.
It's only when both of them are kind of nearby, you
Yeah, when
kind
it's
of
far
know.
off, it's just a little bit of white caps, a little
Yeah.
bit of turbulence out there. You don't know what it is.
You
We
don't know what
should
it is.
get t-shirts where, we have one of these on the front and one of these on the back.
Yeah.
No, I'd love a shirt, a tsunami shirt. We should maybe we should call the podcast tsunami shirts, something like that.
Next time Steve is back, we'll have our tsunami shirts, and this
Yeah.
can be our tsunami podcast.
Yeah,
AI tsunami.
great, cool stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Dom.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, let's do it again very, very soon.
Perfect. Thank you.